Good afternoon. My name is Emer Cook, and I am the Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency. It is a real pleasure for me to open this second public meeting and to welcome all participants. I want to particularly acknowledge our speakers, our external participants in the virtual meeting room, but also everyone who is watching the live broadcast. During our first public meeting in December, we had over 3,500 people following our live broadcast, and I really hope that we will reach a similar audience this time. So this meeting builds on positive experience from the first meeting, but the first meeting was before any vaccines were authorized in Europe. The aim of this meeting is now to provide an important public update on the assessment, approval, and rollout of the new COVID-19 vaccines. We are all keenly aware that the COVID-19 pandemic continues to cause much suffering and hardship for many people across the world, as well as widespread social and economic disruption. Together with the EU regulatory authorities and the European Commission, we have been working around the clock to evaluate, approve, and deliver COVID-19 vaccines to the EU population as fast as possible, but at the same time ensuring that they meet the same high standards of safety, quality, and efficacy that we would expect from any vaccine. So far, 2 vaccines have been approved to prevent COVID-19. The first one is called Comirnaty, and it is already being administered in the EU, and the second is the Moderna vaccine, which was approved just 2 days ago on the 6th of January. 2 further vaccines, one from AstraZeneca and one from Janssen, are under rolling review. We can tell you that having just received some additional data, we're now expecting the AstraZeneca file to be submitted next week with a possible conclusion end of January. But this will, of course, depend on the data we receive and the evaluation progress. Once we actually receive the application, we will make a public announcement on this. So how does the evaluation and approval process work? What more can we tell you about these vaccines? How are they being rolled out? What is the experience so far in member states? These questions and others that you raised today will be addressed during this public meeting. The meeting will explain the basis for the EU approval, delivery, and use of these vaccines and how their safety will be monitored long term. But today's meeting is not only about providing information, it's also an important opportunity for us to listen to you, the public, and our stakeholders. Feedback from you, from patients, from stakeholders, from healthcare professionals, from academia, provides us with very important information on the needs and concerns and how we should move forward. This is extremely important in informing us about any necessary actions to ensure a smooth rollout of the vaccines and to support public confidence in these vaccines and in our decisions. Let's not forget how previous vaccines have changed the world, eliminating smallpox, managing diphtheria, tetanus, typhoid, polio, and measles, to mention just a few of the killer diseases where vaccines have been and continue to be game changers. The vaccines we are currently evaluating are also game changers. Thank you again for your interest and for your helpful input and collaboration. This meeting is very important to us. Without any further delay, I would like to hand over to Noel Wathian, my Deputy Executive Director, who will moderate the event for you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emer. It's also my pleasure to welcome everyone to this important meeting, which I will be moderating. As already explained by Emer, the meeting will describe key aspects of the assessment, the approval and the rollout of 2 new COVID-19 vaccines, Comirnaty and Moderna. As we already stated at the first workshop we held, we are a scientific and regulatory agency and the outcome of our evaluations are scientific reports that also include regulatory language. Because we have often heard from patients and members of the public that they want simpler explanations in a language that most people can understand, we aim to present today the information on these vaccines in an as public-friendly manner as possible, while keeping, of course, the scientific and regulatory precision. The meeting will run in a similar way to our previous stakeholder meeting that took place in December last year. First, we will provide 4 brief presentations. The first presentation will be given by Dr. Harald Ensman, who is the chair of EMA's Human Medicines Committee, the CHMP, and this presentation will focus on the basis for the EU approval of the 2 new vaccines. Then we will continue with Dr. Sabine Strauss, who's chair of EMA's Safety Committee, the PRAC, and her presentation will focus on how the safety of the new COVID-19 vaccines will be assured. Then we move on to the European Commission and Dr. John Ryan, who is Director for Public Health in DG Santé, and he will explain the role of the European Commission in the authorization process and the facilitation of the rollout vaccination. And finally, we also will highlight the importance of the member states in this process, and we will have a presentation by Dr. Nicolai Brun, who is the Chief Medical Officer from the Danish agency. He will speak on behalf of the heads of medicines agencies, and his presentation will focus on ongoing actions for rollout vaccination at national level. After this first part, we will then have a second part, which will be dedicated to listening and responding to the views and questions from members of the public, including patients, citizens, healthcare professionals, academics, and some industry representatives. Without further delay, we will now start with the first presentation, so I hand over to Dr. Harald Ensman. Harald, please.
Thank you, Noel, for this introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. Happy to be here, and frankly, it's a nice break. The past few weeks have been very busy for EMA's Human Medicines Committee, or CHMP. Busy, yes, but productive, I am delighted to say, and I'm very happy, therefore, to give you today a short overview on the approval of our COVID vaccines. Colleagues from EMA who are more experienced with this kind of public stakeholder meetings than I am, they proposed a number of questions, a number of topics, which would probably be of the highest interest. And the EMA colleagues were kind enough to provide slides for each of these topics. So there are 9 questions or topics that I will try to address in the next 20 minutes or so. First, after defining what vaccines we talk about, we will do a tiny bit of molecular biology. That would be topic 3. We will spend quite some time on the clinical trials and the scientific evidence that allowed the approval of these vaccines, topics 4, 5, 6. We will then consider what the availability of these vaccines may mean for our daily life and for special populations, topics 7 and 8. And finally, we will look at the regulatory decision for a conditional marketing authorization for those products. As many as you will have known, and Emma Cook already introduced again, CHMP gave positive opinions on 2 vaccines late in December, just before Christmas, and with the assessment teams working through the holiday season early in January. It has been said before, but let me say it again. Both the development of this vaccine and the regulatory assessment have been done with an unprecedented speed. And this is even more remarkable as we have here a completely new scientific approach. These 2 vaccines are the first 2 RNA vaccines ever. Unlike other vaccines, these innovative RNA vaccines do not contain the virus itself or parts of the virus, that will then become the target for the body's immune defense against the virus. These RNA vaccines, they contain only the plan how to make this target with our own cells. They contain only the instructions for producing a specific protein from SARS-CoV-2. But before I get carried away with the very interesting scientific details of these vaccines, some down-to-earth details on the use of these vaccines. Just as many other vaccines, vaccination here means an intramuscular injection, or more specific, to get the full protection, you will need 2 injections 3 or 4 weeks apart. Now, a bit of science, bear with me, because these 2 vaccines are really something new. All vaccines prepare the body's immune system for the defense against a viral or bacterial infection. Can we have the next slide? Whenever the immune system had previous contact with, let's say, a virus, the immune system learns how to deal with that. Whenever the virus comes back, the immune system is better prepared to deal with it. And using this basic principle, other vaccines will contain a more or less harmless variant of the virus itself or parts of the virus. After injection, these parts of the virus will become a target for the body's immune defense against the disease. Simple. Now, what is new? New is that these new mRNA vaccines do not contain the virus. They contain only the messenger RNA for the spike protein. They contain only the plan how to make this characteristic part of the virus. They contain the instructions for producing the spike protein. It will be our own body cells who will translate the mRNA. The body cells will make some of the spike protein using this mRNA and then break down this messenger RNA, kind of burn after reading. There's no virus. Even the mRNA has been destroyed. There is only the spike protein made by our own cells. But the immune system will recognize this as a foreign protein, as an antigen, as a target, and will build up an immune reaction against it. If later there's a contact with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, with all its own spike proteins on the virus surface, the immune system will recognize and efficiently target it. The immune system had the necessary target practice with the spike protein. Great science, okay? But how do we know that this piece of science works in real life? As usual, efficacy has to be shown in clinical trials. And here we had impressively huge placebo-controlled trials with a very high number of participants, 44,000 for Comirnaty and 30,000 for the Moderna vaccine. Placebo-controlled trials, this means only half of the participants get the vaccine. The other half would get a placebo, a dummy injection. So that the participants could not know whether or not they got the real vaccine, and therefore could not possibly behave differently. For example, be less cautious knowing that they got the real vaccine. In each of those big groups, some participants got ill, got COVID. But most of the participants who got ill, they were in the placebo group, only very few in the vaccine group. To be more precise, for both vaccines, 95% of the cases of the disease were in the placebo group, only 5% were in the vaccine group. And remember, please, the number of participants in the placebo and in the vaccine group were pretty much the same. This means each vaccine prevents the majority of COVID cases, of symptomatic disease. It does not prevent all, a few escape, but the very vast majority of cases of disease is prevented. We know from the control group, from the placebo group, what would have happened without the vaccine. Within only 6 weeks, approximately, we would have to expect 88 cases, and of these, 84 were prevented by the vaccination. Only 4 were not prevented, got through. Well, good for these 84 participants who did not become ill, and good for our health system. This stressed health system did not need to take care of these additional patients too. It is, by the way, quite remarkable how similar these two products we have here now are. Let's look at Comirnaty first. With a 95% efficacy, or if you want the precise numbers here, with 162 COVID cases in the placebo group and only 8 cases in the vaccine group, outstanding efficacy. Of course, this benefit comes with a risk. There are adverse effects. The more common adverse effects are the very same we see with many vaccines, such as pain at the injection site or the signs of the immune reaction, chills and fever. More concerning effects, like peripheral facial palsy, are very rare, but of course could be serious, like anaphylactic reactions, and then require appropriate medical care. As I said, the two mRNA vaccines are remarkably similar. For the Moderna product, we have an efficacy of 94%, with, again, the exact numbers, 185 cases in the placebo group and 11 cases in the vaccinated group. And they are quite similar with regard to the adverse effects as well. Local reactions at the injection site, signs of the immune reaction are more frequent. The more severe anaphylactic reactions are fortunately quite rare. So, looking good, no? Well, so far, I told you what we do know about the benefits and the risks of these products. Of course, with such a fast development and such a rapid regulatory assessment and approval, there are important things we do not know, or do not know yet, but intend to find out. For example, we do not know how long the protection given by the vaccines will last. We will find out by following the participants in the clinical trials for the next 2 years, and of course by observing when and how many COVID cases will occur in people currently being vaccinated in the campaigns all over the world. But at the moment, frankly, we do not know. Another thing we do not know is whether or to what extent, next slide please, vaccinated people, can they still be, no, one back, sorry. Yes. The question is, can vaccinated people still be infectious? Must we expect that vaccinated persons spread the virus without getting ill themselves? Well, we certainly hope that the vaccine helps here too, but just now, again, we simply do not know. Therefore, this is a quite important message now. Until we know more about this, precautions must not be relaxed. Even after vaccination, even after you get the jab, please continue with the current precautionary measures. Well, this may be disappointing, but the benefits of the vaccines are nevertheless very obvious. There is a clear benefit for the individual. Well, fewer people getting sick, and for society, the healthcare systems will hopefully not be overwhelmed. But while that is impressive and great, we need to be realistic. and allow me to give this message here. Unfortunately, this is not yet the end of the pandemic. This means even with the vaccines approved and becoming available, our life cannot immediately be as before. We must continue social distancing, wear face masks, avoid contacts, and increase hygiene. The exact details how to do that will depend on the local situation and the level of transmission, but please do not relax here. That is really, really important. Well, there's this obvious standard, as just mentioned, all of us should do. And the situation may, of course, be even more complicated in some special situations or for special populations we will address now. There is, of course, the possibility that you and I may have had an infection even without knowing it. Frankly, again, at the moment, we do not know how much additional protection a vaccination provides for someone who survived a COVID-19 infection. But what we do know is that adverse effects, side effects of the vaccination appeared not to be relevantly different. Therefore, we have concluded that it is not necessary to test whether or not you're already possibly immune because you had an infection. You do not need to get a test before getting the vaccine. EMA and the companies are working right now on trials to provide evidence on the benefit and risk in children. Currently, however, the mRNA vaccines are not approved for the use in young children. And we have only limited data for immunocompromised people. Well, it seems plausible that their weakened immune system may respond less to the vaccine, that they may not have this impressive 95% efficacy, but still, very clearly, we expect that the protection that can be achieved in immune-compromised people still justifies a vaccination. There are extremely limited data from the clinical trials for pregnant and breastfeeding women. What is reassuring from non-clinical studies, including animal experiments, there's no evidence whatsoever that there would be a particular risk for pregnant or breastfeeding women and their child. Nevertheless, without any really relevant data from the clinical trials, or without experience from the currently starting vaccination campaigns, there is uncertainty, no doubt about that. And therefore, it will need to be a case-by-case decision, considering the risk of exposure and infection, the risk of a more severe cause of the disease on one hand, and the benefits of the vaccination on the other. I can be extremely short regarding ethnicities and genders. As the trials were unusually large, with 10,000 of participants, we have a quite good data for various subgroups, gender, ethnicity, age, and so on and so forth. And high efficacy was seen everywhere. Now, based on all this, the benefit-risk decision for these products was obvious. Next slide. What we see is a quite impressive efficacy and mostly mild and transient side effects. This clearly positive benefit-risk balance, together with a high need for vaccines in the current pandemic situation, this allowed us to accelerate the assessment process and grant an early conditional marketing authorization. Conditional means that there is a marketing authorization while we are still missing some data for a complete picture, and that the companies are obliged to provide them. These additional data are expected to cover most of the unknowns I outlined. They will provide evidence how long efficacy lasts, on long-term safety, how well the vaccine protects immunocompromised people, children, and pregnant women, to what extent they prevent asymptomatic disease, spreading the virus, and some details on pharmaceutical particularities of mRNA viruses and vaccines. Allow me to summarize what I tried to tell you. We have approved the first two COVID-19 vaccines. Both are mRNA vaccines, representing a new approach to vaccination. And both showed impressively high efficacy. To make them available as soon as possible, they got a conditional marketing authorization, and therefore we expect important additional information for the near future, for example, on their efficacy in preventing asymptomatic infections. And we will get many additional data now with the rollout of the vaccines in the European Union and globally. But for these post-marketing safety data, it is not CHMP, it is EMA's Safety Committee, PRAC, who are in the lead. And therefore, I gladly hand over to Sabine Strauss, chairperson of PRAC, who will cover the post-marketing activities on safety much better than I ever could. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harald, for your kind introduction. And like you said, we will now focus on the safety of these vaccines. Next slide, please. In the next few minutes, I will take you through how we intend to monitor the safety of these vaccines, and I will address, just like Harold, all of the questions that you see here, like why do we need to monitor, how do we do that, how can I report an ADR, how will we know if the side effects are caused by the vaccine, and where can I find more information. Next slide, please. This is a slide to put a little bit into context. Safety is, of course, the focus of my presentation, and then mainly the post-approval safety. However, like Harold also already highlighted in his presentation, safety is being monitored from the beginning of the development of the product. As you can see on the left part of the slide, that is showing everything that's already been done pre-approval. So the quality is checked, non-clinical studies are assessed, the clinical trials are assessed, and that has led to the decision that the benefits outweigh the risks. Now we are going to focus on real-life use of the products, and that's being done with the post-approval safety monitoring. The EMA's Safety Committee, the PRAC, and also all the national competent authorities are very well aware of their responsibility to EU citizens to collect and analyze every piece of information on the safety of these COVID-19 vaccines so that we can ensure that the benefits keep outweighing the risks. And how we do that, we will see in the next few slides. So please to the next slide. Why do we need to monitor the safety of medicines after the approval? We have seen that the data from the trials, they are very large, but we also know that all medicines, including these vaccines, have benefits and have risks. At the time of the approval, we have the data from the clinical trials and from quality and preclinical studies, but the data from the clinical trials will not be able to assess the full picture, because after approval, the medicines will be used in real conditions and by a far larger population. So post-marketing safety monitoring is important to identify any new or any changing risks as quickly as possible and take the appropriate action. Next slide, please. Who does the monitoring of the safety in the European Union? We have a very robust pharmacovigilance system available in Europe. It's a rather busy slide, but on the right hand, you can see that there are very clear responsibilities for regulatory authorities, marketing authorization holders, and that patients and healthcare professionals, and I should say here not patients, but people who will be vaccinated, play a key role in the pharmacovigilance monitoring. On the left side of the slide, you can see the pharmacovigilance cycle. That consists of collecting of data, analyzing those data, make a decision on the data, communicate the decision if needed, and again, monitor. So that's an ongoing cycle which allows us to identify promptly any new or any changing in risks of the vaccines. Next slide, please. The requirements for the COVID-19 vaccines are very strict and rigorous as for all medicines in the European Union. So we have core safety requirements, and the pharmaceutical legislation only allows products on the market if the benefits outweigh the risks. In this situation, we have a very special context because the vaccines will be given to healthy people, many of them, large population, in a very short period of time. And therefore, it's very important that we can respond very quickly. And additional resources have therefore also been mobilized to closely monitor the safety and assess any new information as soon as it becomes available. The safety requirements for the marketing authorization holders have also been strengthened, and instead of providing in line with the regular legislation every 6 months the safety data, they now need to submit those safety data every month to the regulatory authorities. The safety vaccines in real life are studied by several tools, and on the next slide I will go a bit more into detail. If we can go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So what we will do is we will have a very intensive analysis of all reports of suspected side effects reported from people who have received the vaccine and from the healthcare professionals. These reports will be collected in the European database, the Eurovigilance database, and will be continuously monitored, checked, and analyzed. In addition to that, the marketing authorization holders have to conduct post-authorization safety studies as required by the regulators. We also will have studies initiated and coordinated by the regulators. And we have a very intense international collaboration on the COVID-19 vaccine monitoring. Next slide, please. The studies that we have a very robust pharmacovigilance system available in Europe, but we have even added to that safety surveillance by setting up a European infrastructure for specifically this vaccine monitoring. This infrastructure has gathered information on key adverse events so that we know the background information on these key adverse events. It has established an EU network of sources where we can find data, and it has developed template protocols for vaccine coverage, effectiveness, and safety studies. In addition to the spontaneous reporting system, we have additional proactive monitoring in place where we will collect primary data, so data immediately specifically for this purpose, using an app-based application, and that will further provide information on the incidence of adverse events. And this will be complemented by use of data that are already available in order to do rapid signal assessment. And we will have additional EMA-funded safety studies that will be put in place. Next slide, please. So how can you report safety effects? We already said that it's very important that healthcare professionals and people who have received the vaccine report everything that they suspect might be an adverse event. And you can do that to your national competent authority or to the vaccine manufacturer. These events will be collected in the Eurovigilance, the European database that collects all adverse events, not only from Europe, but from across the world. And I would like to take the opportunity to encourage everybody to report any suspected adverse event they might see or might experience. Next slide, please. Another very important point here is how do we know that the side effects are caused by the vaccine? There are established analysis techniques available that we use in order to assess whether a side effect that's being reported is likely to be caused by the vaccine. However, what is very important in this context of the mass vaccination campaigns is that many people will be getting the vaccine in a short period of time. So many of them might develop an illness or might die for other reasons. However, it occurs in close proximity to the vaccination. If these occur immediately or just after the vaccination, these may be reported as suspected adverse events to the vaccine, but it's still possible that the association was just due to chance. So we need to very carefully assess all the available reports and very carefully go through them in order to assess whether it's caused by the vaccine or not. And if the analysis concludes that the side effect is caused by the vaccine, we will need to take action. And for example, one of the actions is that we included in the package leaflet. For example, what I would like to highlight here is a very small number of severe allergic reactions, anaphylaxis, was reported by countries that started the vaccination campaign a bit earlier than in Europe. And that enabled us to review all the cases reported very carefully, and that allowed us to provide information in the product information that is helpful for healthcare professionals to deal with this and to inform patients better, or people who get the vaccine. Next slide, please. Of course, it's important that you have as much information as possible, and probably your national health authorities will also have a lot of information available, but you can always find the information regarding the vaccines on the EMA website. And I show here the Comirnaty. On the next slide, the Moderna will be shown. And here you can see in your own language all the recommendations for healthcare professionals and for patients, the information on studies that are done, and if there is any information that needs to be communicated urgently because there has been a new side effect, for example, you can always go to these sites of the EMA and find the information regarding the safety and the efficacy of these vaccines. So that brings me to the next slide, where I will try to summarize. I think Harold's and my presentation have shown that vaccines are a key pillar of public health and have been proven to prevent serious illnesses and serious diseases. However, no medicine and no vaccine is 100% safe. What we know about the vaccines now is that the side effects are usually mild and don't last too long. However, there is still a lot we need to further evaluate. But what we also have to keep in mind is that even if there are rare, serious adverse events, these must be balanced against the prevention of severe or even fatal diseases, like, for example, the COVID-19. We have a very strong European pharmacovigilance surveillance system in place, and safety will not be compromised. We are able to collect and act on all new information that becomes available. We have taken unprecedented steps in order to monitor safety in practice, to be transparent, and to take action as soon as possible. Like also highlighted by Harold, despite the fact that we are now getting to be vaccinated, it remains very important to also adhere to the non-pharmacological measures that we have available, and that is the use of a face mask, the hand hygiene, and the physical distance. It remains very important to take that into account. COVID-19 vaccine safety relies very much on your support, and the safety monitoring can only be stronger with your participation. So once again, a call to please report any suspected side effects. And with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague, John Ryan, from the European Commission to take over. So please, over to you, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation so far, Sabine and Harold. And I'd like to say a few words to you now regarding the role of the European Commission in the authorization process and in facilitating the rollout of vaccination. Next slide. The issues I'll be talking about concern the adoption of an EU vaccination strategy and what the objectives of that strategy were. I'll talk to you about the authorization process from the perspective of the Commission and also the importance of public information on this process. I'd like to then speak about the discussions which we've had with the Member States on preparedness for the rollout of the vaccination and for the deployment of the vaccine. The latest situation regarding the Member States rollout will be explained in more detail on the basis of the survey which we carried out with the Member States. I'd like to say a few words then on public confidence and on the main concerns and issues which we have identified so far within the European Union, and on the communication activities aimed at building public confidence. And finally, I'll give you some additional resources if you have questions regarding any of the points in my presentation. Next slide. So, kicking off in June, we in the European Commission proposed a vaccination strategy, which we agreed with the Member States on the 17th of June, which looked at several different important points, I think. First of all, to accelerate the development, the manufacturing, and the deployment of vaccines for COVID, to ensure the quality, safety, and efficacy of those vaccines, to guarantee a swift and equitable access to the vaccines for our Member States and our populations, while at the same time balancing this with the need to support the international solidarity for the availability of vaccines. Next slide. Further points which were discussed and agreed in this strategy document were that the European Union should secure the production of vaccines sufficient for our population through advanced purchase agreements with vaccine producers using funds from the European Union budget in the emergency support instrument. And this is the process where we actually negotiated and purchased through an advanced purchase agreement a number of potential vaccines. And then there's the issue, of course, of how to make sure that the regulatory framework and the flexibility which is contained in our existing regulatory framework should be taken advantage of to make sure that the regulatory side goes as quickly as the scientific side, in order to make sure that the development, the authorization, and the availability of vaccines at the scale of the entire EU population is done as quickly as possible. Next slide. So as regards the role of the Commission, the first stage is that the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use carries out an independent scientific assessment of the application of the pharmaceutical company, and the agency then submits its scientific opinion to the Commission, which is responsible for issuing the marketing authorization that's valid for the entire European Union. Following a positive recommendation from the European Medicines Agency, the Commission verifies the soundness of or the correctness of all the supporting elements, for example, the scientific justification, the product information, the educational material for healthcare professionals, the labeling of the product, and the obligations for the vaccine developer, conditions for use, and possible obligations for Member States. These are all the elements that the Commission reviews. And when this information is verified, we also check, of course, that the necessary information is available to patients and to healthcare professionals across EU in their national language. And before we make a final decision, we consult with the Member States. Thank you. Next slide. So, in terms of the public information, if the qualified majority of the Member States is in favour, the European Commission would adopt a decision authorising the marketing of the vaccine and would inform the developer, the pharmaceutical company concerned. And this is published transparently in the European Registry of Medicinal Products. And then as a consequence, the vaccine can now be marketed everywhere in the European Union. Next slide. As regards preparedness for vaccination and vaccine deployment, we published a communication on the 15th of October, which laid out a number of key elements which the member states would need to take into account in making their preparedness for the vaccination campaign. First of all, the allocation of sufficient capacity within the healthcare system to deliver the vaccines. Looking at the issues of easy and affordable access for target populations, in other words, for the vulnerable groups that have been defined in the national strategies. Thirdly, the deployment of vaccines with different product characteristics, different storage needs, different transport needs, and the issue of communication on the benefits and risks and the importance of vaccines as a response measure for the ongoing pandemic. Next slide. Now, we carried out a survey with the member states to see how they were reacting to this communication of October. And many member states plan to use existing vaccination services and their current reserves of personal protective equipment. Many plan to stockpile equipment via national or the EU joint procurement procedures. We have a number of these contracts in place at European Union level in concerning personal protective equipment, but also syringes and needles and so on. The majority of member states said that they would offer the vaccination free of charge. And the majority, of course, as well, have existing national immunization information registries. And they're going to use these registries to process the vaccination data at national level. Next slide. So I turn now to the questions regarding the public and the public confidence. And we have national focal points for vaccination who have reported a number of issues of public concern. And these can be summarized as concerning safety and efficacy of the vaccine, the eventual side effects of the vaccine, questions on the speed on which the vaccines were developed, and the thoroughness of the clinical trials and the risk assessment that was carried out. I'm just repeating here now what will be the topics that have been identified as issues of public concern. There's also a lot of fake news and disinformation floating around, not only concerning COVID vaccines, but vaccination in general. And on the other hand, there's a lack of reliable information sources for the public in an accessible way, I would say. And when people start to look for information through social media or through the internet, they very often come on the wrong, on information which is not validated, shall we say. There's also an issue regarding mandatory and voluntary vaccination, and this is of particular interest to the healthcare professionals. And finally, there's the issue of the country of origin of the vaccine manufacturer, which has been raised as an issue by several parts of the public. Next slide. So what we've tried to do is to share available scientific information and also share information on the current epidemiological situation and the way it's developing. So we try and be transparent. We publish all of our risk assessments as well publicly, and we publish the minutes of meetings where the member states are discussing the response. So we try and really insist on having a maximum of transparency in respect of the available data on the outbreak, but also on the discussion of what the response should be. We're also monitoring through social media the questions and doubts that have been expressed regarding the COVID vaccine, and also making an effort to be constructive and to put out validated scientific information on the nature of the vaccine and why it would be a useful public health tool. We also try and dialogue with target groups, in particular the representatives of the aged associations, people with chronic diseases, associations of people with chronic diseases, associations of healthcare professionals. This dialogue is going on all the time, so we don't talk only with the member states or with the scientific community, but also with a much wider group of operators, shall we say, who may have an interest in COVID and its control and its vaccination. We try and use the social media, the mass media, television programs and radios to circulate information. And we also provide this information in a way that the member states can use the elements on a national level. And we have provided a number of elements of information to public health authorities and general practitioners, because not all of the member states are in the same position as regards the support that they can give to public health authorities and general practitioners and pharmacists, for example, and nurses. Some countries are better equipped in communication tools, and therefore the Commission and the European Medicines Agency have been making an effort to reach out and make available information and resources to those who will be responsible for delivering the vaccine. Next slide. So I mentioned these additional resources. We have a new website on safe and effective vaccination, which is available in all of the EU languages. And we also have a number of fact sheets, which are useful summaries of issues regarding vaccination and COVID, which are also available in languages, in different languages. And we have a report of the ECDC, which I would also mention, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. And if you'd like, we also have some videos from very well-known scientists like Peter Piot, or nurses and patients, which we also make available, which I think gives a personal touch and shows the appreciation of individuals rather than institutions regarding the vaccine. So those were my main points in my presentation, and looking forward to the discussion afterwards, of course. And I'd like to introduce the next speaker, who is Nikolai Brun, who will speak on behalf of the heads of the Medicines Agencies at national level regarding ongoing actions for rollout of vaccination at the national level in the member states. Nikolai, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for an excellent presentation. I enjoyed it very much. My name is Nikolai Brun. I'm the Director of Division, Chief Medical Officer at the Danish Medicines Agency. And today I'm speaking both as a leader in one of our national competent authorities, but also on behalf of the heads of Medicines Agency. I'll just go over what the HMA is, then discuss how vaccine rollout in member states can be organized, with Denmark as an example, surveillance of side effects in COVID vaccines, supplementing what Sabine presented from a member state perspective, a bit about the knowledge of effectiveness and safety of COVID vaccines, and how we promote trust in health authorities through open and transparent communication. Take the next slide. The HMA, or the Heads of Medicines Agency, is not a formal legal entity. It's an informal organization that has as its purpose to coordinate the role of the national competent authorities throughout the 27 European member states. It has a wide range of activities. It meets in plenary sessions 4 times a year, and it has formed task forces and working groups, both alone under the HMA umbrella, but also and especially during the COVID pandemic, together with the EMA in joint EMA-HMA action groups, task forces, and so forth. Some of them dealing with COVID, but we also have older examples dealing with medicine shortages, dealing with big data, which have been very successful. The agenda of the HMA is to promote and protect public health in Europe and to foster an effective and efficient European medicines regulatory system also on the national level. This is how the vaccine rolled out has been organized nationally, and I will from here on use Denmark as an example. I trust it's not too different in many other member states. As you know, there's transport from the producer, it arrives, it is stored and repackaged. Some of this is more challenging for some vaccines than others, depending on the temperature requirements, and it's then transported out in Denmark to the regions that we have that will be in charge of administering the vaccines. Is thawed at the hospital pharmacies in each region and then transported to the three main vaccinators in Denmark. There's vaccination in hospitals. We have vaccination in centralized vaccination centers, of which there is between around 20 in the whole country, where people go themselves once they're offered a vaccination. And then there's the vaccination in outgoing functions, which is mainly directed at nursing and care homes. In Denmark, the vaccines have been delivered. Once they've been delivered to the member states, they have been prioritized for, first of all, frontline staff at hospitals and nursing homes. Not all frontline staff, but frontline staff needed in the care of COVID patients. Secondly, selected citizens in nursing homes in areas with a high incidence, and then selected citizens above 65 years of age at high risk of a severe course of COVID, according to certain pre-specified list of comorbidities. And then they're rolled out, as I just outlined before. From a member state, it's very important that we can support the efforts that Sabine Strauss highlighted on the European level. And that means that we need to be able to monitor any side effects, potential and verified, of any COVID vaccines. And in order for that to happen, and in order to build trust, it's very important that we have a robust system for reporting adverse reactions and monitoring the vaccines locally. This can then feed into the European system as outlined by Sabine. It's important that our healthcare professionals and citizens are able to easily report suspected side effects at a national level, and healthcare professionals and citizens should have the necessary information to be able to report. There's a focus on high quality adverse reaction reports, which is crucial for signal monitoring in case of any signals that have not been raised during the approval procedures. There's a stricter reporting obligation to be considered at national level. In Denmark, any suspected adverse reaction is mandatory to report for the healthcare professional who administers the vaccine. And we are also launching studies to monitor both the effectiveness in the real world population and safety of the vaccines. So what knowledge do we have of effectiveness and safety of the COVID vaccines? Well, first of all, we have the dossiers that were submitted to the EMA for approval. And as part of the approval and the conditional marketing authorizations, the companies will continue to provide study results and data as they continue to be generated. In addition, independent studies of COVID vaccines coordinated at an EU level will give more information on the vaccine's long-term safety and effectiveness. At a member state level, we may also carry out our own additional studies at a national level using national cohorts. And in Denmark, we are planning such a study with a head-to-head comparison between the vaccines in a selected population of vaccinated subjects. This will be called the Enforce study. And member states may also use other means to gather data in real time and complement routine pharmacovigilance actions, such as national health registries, electronic health records, and we can also use AI-based signal generation. And I'm happy to say that in Denmark, we are planning on surveying the national patient registries for any side effects that have not been captured by the healthcare professionals administering the vaccines, so that we can detect for signals that may occur in the vaccinated populations in spite of them perhaps not having been reported. Next slide, which I believe is the last one, is the very important task of promoting trust in health authorities through an open and transparent communication. These are just two examples of cartoons of effect and side effect, virkning and bivirkning in Danish, where we have launched a campaign on how citizens and healthcare professionals can monitor effects, can monitor side effects, how to report them, what you can expect normally when you are vaccinated, what is a normal side effect that you should not be worried about, and when should you be worried, and how should you report it in case you experience anything beyond that. So we're stepping up our communication efforts to support an informed debate on vaccines, an informed basis knowledge for everyone. It's very important that we are transparent in these efforts, and everyone, in our view, has the right to be informed. Information on how the vaccines have been developed and how they're monitored going forward is absolutely crucial to generate trust, and transparency is the key for this. So with that, I would like to say thank you and hand back to you, Noel.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. And now we have heard all the presentations from the 4 speakers, providing an overview of the assessment, approval, and the ongoing rollout of Comirnaty and Moderna. We will now break for 5 minutes, and then we begin our open session where we will listen to members of the public and respond to their questions and or comments. So we'll pause now for 5 minutes. So welcome back, everybody. We will now open the floor to various members of the public who have been invited to join us here in the virtual WebEx room. We received a large number of requests, and this means that unfortunately we could not accommodate everyone. During the selection process, we endeavored to include a well-balanced range of stakeholder groups, affiliations, and geographical locations. So amongst the audience, we have patients, carers, consumers, citizens, healthcare professionals, pharmaceutical industry, and academia residing in 24 different countries. We invite those who have joined us in the WebEx room to write to us in the chat box, and several of you have already done so, or to raise their hand to take the microphone. In addition, we have enabled a dedicated mailbox for those who are following the event via the live broadcast, so they can also send us comments or questions. In addition to the speakers that we listened to prior to the break, we have 4 additional panelists to support the open session and to answer to the different questions, and these are EMA colleagues as follows: Fergus Sweeney, who's EMA's Head of Clinical Studies and Manufacturing; Melanie Carr, who is EMA's Head of Stakeholders and Communication; Marco Cavalieri, who is EMA's Head of Biological Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy; and Peter Arlett, who is EMA's Head of Data Analytics and Methods. I now pass on the floor to my colleague, Juan Garcia Burgos, who is Head of Public and Stakeholder Engagement, and he will assist me in reading some of the contributions we may get via the chat or through the external mailbox. So I hand over to you, Juan.
Thank you very much, Noel, and good afternoon, everybody. So yes, as Noel has said, we will take questions from the floor, from the people, the participants who are in the WebEx room, also from the comments that they have done in the chat, but also from the comments and the questions that we are receiving from the broadcast. And if you agree, we'll proceed as last time, where we will try to take from the 3 different sources. And we can start with some interventions from members of the WebEx room, and we have Marco Conehag who wanted to talk, so we give the floor to Marco.
Thank you very much for the floor. First of all, thank you for the presentations. Thanks to all the speakers. We think this particular event is extremely important to everything that will happen in the next few months. So my name is Marco, and I represent European Liver Patient Association, which is based in European Union, but we include members from the Europe as defined by WHO. So our members already received vaccinations in December last year. So there are several of them that are waiting for the second vaccination. And this is the message that we wanted just to say. So we had members, patients with rare liver diseases, patients with chronic liver diseases, patients with liver disease and other accompanying diseases that already were vaccinated. And until today, we have no report whatsoever on any kind of different side effects that they would face. So we think that in European Union, at this point, we have some problems with the trust from the public, and this kind of messages and also the communication that was done on 15th of October that was presented from John Ryan was extremely important for our members to see where are we going and to try to lower the spread of fake news. We try to acknowledge the excellent job that was done by researchers, healthcare experts, and also European Medicine Agency. And in next steps, we see a joint collaboration where we should use our networks of patient representatives, patient advocates, just to spread the news about the vaccination and to spread and to try to build trust. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marco. I think that's a very reassuring message that you're giving in terms of first experience. And as you mentioned, we will this workshop today, which is the second in a row, we are doing this in order to make sure that we are as transparent as possible and that we engage as much as possible with the general public in order to understand their concerns and to provide the necessary assurance. So I'll hand over back to you, Juan, for the next question.
Yes, thank you very much. And the next question, I will take a question which is coming from the broadcast, and Rob Cam, a patient representative, is asking, what about extending the time between the first and the second dose, and whether is this safe, is it recommendable, and why to do it?
Okay, so I give this question first to Harold Ensman. Harold, please.
Yeah, that is a question that is all over the place. Open a newspaper and you will find this question. What we can do here is try to be transparent and to broker the information we have. You need to realize what we get is the documentation of the trials that have been performed. And they have been performed in a specific way, in a specific time window between the two shots. And it is obvious that time matters. Therefore, what we can at the moment do is to say, under specific condition as defined by those clinical trials, and then translate it into our approval, into the marketing authorization. Under these conditions, we have this high efficacy. It is plausible that this will not vanish from one day to another. But here again, the best we can do is to provide the information we receive from the marketing authorization holders, from the academia, from the scientific community, from specialists in the field, to make sure that this information is available for those who really are out there in the front treating patients, to draw the conclusions that are currently possible beyond that. But I have to admit, the exact thing, when is a cut line for the time, is something we cannot do at the moment based on clear scientific evidence. Yeah. Therefore, what we can do is say we know it works in a specific time window. This is our approval. Beyond that, this is a scientific judgment, and currently I'm not aware that we have sufficiently hard data that would give us a reason to put this into the marketing authorization. From a pragmatic point of view, that can be dealt with from those who do it out in the member states. And here, scientific knowledge, medical expertise, and some common sense is probably the best thing we can hope for. Repeat, from our part, currently, transparency is the best we can offer. Over.
Thank you, Harold. Back to you, Juan, for the next question.
Thank you. I will take now a question from the internal chat, and Dominic Sturth is asking about the limited data for some groups, for risk groups, for example, populations or patients with rare diseases or other diseases such as blood diseases or other metabolic diseases, and whether there is any preference or which is the best vaccine, what we could use for the different groups.
Can I put this question to Marco Cavalieri?
Yes, thank you, Noel, and good afternoon to all of you. I think the clinical trials try to recruit a large number of subjects with comorbidities and try to be as broad as possible. But of course, there are some limitations to what really can be recruited into these studies, despite they are quite large. And therefore, their representation is not always optimal, and at least certain type of comorbidities were not really well represented there. But say this, based on what we are seeing, there is no reason to believe that the efficacy of this messenger RNA vaccine will be inferior in all these variety of patients with other comorbidities, with the only possible exception of the immunocompromised patients. But even for the immunocompromised, the vaccine still can be used, and is expected that they will generate anyway some level of protection, even if we might have to expect that the protection could be inferior than what's seen with other subjects or other patients with comorbidities. And this is the reason why studies in the post-approval phase, both in terms of effectiveness, but also dedicated studies, will try to look into the immunogenicity, level of protection and safety in this population.
Thank you, Marco. Juan?
Thank you very much. We propose to give the floor now to Michelle Ribasi, who is in the WebEx room.
Thank you very much to give me the floor, and thank you to organize this meeting. I have some questions about side effects. You see, Pfizer, BioNTech recommend that people with severe allergic reactions to a drug or food and people under anticoagulant taking treatment should not be vaccinated. However, cases have been reported in Europe where people with a history of allergy or under anticoagulant treatment are vaccinated. What do you think, Emma? Are the health professionals sufficiently informed and trained not to vaccinate such people? Second question is about allergic reaction. The rate of anaphylactic shock is 10 times higher than that a seasonal flu vaccine. How does the EMA plan to monitor several allergic reaction incidents across Europe? Does the EMA recommend that the second dose should not be given to people who show the allergic reaction? What do you think about that? Thank you for the answer.
Thank you, Michelle. Can I put these questions to Sabine Strauss and then followed up by Peter Arlett?
Thank you very much. Very relevant questions. Thank you for that. So first of all, if you highlight several important things, I think in the current product information, it's highlighted that patients with bleed disease, so coagulopathies, that the injection should be given carefully because they might have more bleeding or more risk of bruising. It's not a contraindication, so it is allowed. The only contraindication at the moment is hypersensitivity to an active substance or to any of the excipients of the vaccine. And indeed, you're quite right, at the moment, also in the product information, it's stated that if anybody has had a severe allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, at the first time of the vaccination, then that person should not receive a vaccination anymore. So I hope that answers a part of your question. The other question is the frequency of allergic reactions. Indeed, we have seen that it seems to be that here the possibility for serious anaphylaxis seems to be higher than in other vaccines in general. Nevertheless, from what we know for the moment, but it's still early days, the occurrence of anaphylaxis is very rare. At the moment, the best estimate that we can make is 1 in 100,000. And like I said, we always have to balance, because of course, if you have an anaphylactic reaction, that's very scary and that's very worrisome. However, it can be treated. Healthcare professionals are aware that it might occur, and in the product information, there's clear instructions on what to do and how long to keep patients under observation. For the moment, it seems that that information is sufficient. So I think we have to balance the very rare occurrence of a severe side effect, which is of course very concerning for the patient, to the benefits of the product, which is of course the prevention, and as we have seen, it's very highly effective in preventing COVID disease and severe disease and maybe even fatalities. So I hope I answered with that most of your questions, and then I'd like to hand over indeed, like Noel said, to Peter Arndt.
Peter, please.
Yes, well, to complement Sabine's intervention, as Sabine said, anaphylaxis appears to be very rare, perhaps about 1 in 100,000 people vaccinated. Clearly very important, however, and that's why there's specific advice included in the product information for the products. Madame Ravasi, you asked about how this will be monitored. Well, because it's very rare, probably the most important way it will be monitored is through patients and their healthcare professionals reporting when they suspect that allergy or anaphylaxis has occurred. So I would reinforce the point that Sabine made in her presentation about the importance of reporting suspected side effects. Obviously, we will be reviewing with the national competent authorities and the safety committee, the PRAC, the reports that come in on a daily basis, and assessing them to see if it impacts on the advice we're giving about how the vaccines should be given safely. The point you raise about our healthcare professionals sufficiently informed is a really important question. And I think we have a collective responsibility as regulators, as patient groups, as healthcare professional groups, to reinforce the key messages about how to use these vaccines optimally. And that will be multi-layered, really. There'll be European level communications, there'll be national and local communications, and using different media, be they online, be they leaflets, and so on. And I think we all need to share information on what works well in terms of getting the messages across. What I can say is we'll be watching this issue of allergy and anaphylaxis very, very closely over the days and weeks to come. And if anything impacts on how best to use the vaccines, we will take action very quickly. Thank you.
Perhaps I can also add to that in terms of informing healthcare professionals in the best possible way, that we have a dedicated forum with healthcare professionals organizations. That will be also something that we will bring up with them and see what further recommendations they can give, so that we can put that in place together with the member states, because we have to work hand in hand, both EMA and the member states, in order to reach out to the healthcare professionals across the EU. Back to you again, Juan.
Thank you, Noel. So we are taking a question now coming from the broadcast, and this is from Sebastián Castañeda, and he is asking that the vaccines that we have been presented, that has been presented today, the ones which are approved, have efficacy close to 95%, but the ones which now are coming, such as, for example, the one from AstraZeneca, it looks to be less effective. Is this a risk for the population? Why are they being approved with lower effectiveness?
So I give the floor to Harald or Marco. First, I have to say that no other vaccines have been approved yet by EMA and by the European Commission other than BioNTech, Pfizer, and Moderna. So we have not yet taken a decision for any of the other. Harald or Marco, do you want to further elaborate on this?
Apologies, but this is a running procedure, and comparing products, even with one of them currently under assessment, is something I'd be extremely careful. Therefore, you will understand that I cannot comment on this at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, we move on to the next question.
Yeah, we have now a question from the chat, which is from Joanna Agache, who is asking whether the PRAC will consider recommendations which has been issued on safety measures by learned societies, by European learned societies, for example, recommendations of anaphylaxis management, which has been just released by the European Academy of Allergy and Clinical Immunology.
Sabine, I think that's one for you.
Thank you very much. And anaphylaxis is on the top of our minds indeed. And I can assure you that PRAC will take all the information that's available in account. And depending on the recommendations, we need to study them, of course. But what we have tried to do in the current product information is indeed to align as much as possible with the existing recommendations in order to ensure the safe use of the vaccines also in regarding the anaphylaxis. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. Juan?
Yeah, we will give now the floor to a participant in the WebEx room, to Francois Houillet.
Hello, good afternoon. So my question is on the status of current vaccine trials, future ones, and evaluation criteria. So when you explain that longer-term data are needed up to 24 months, could you explain what you mean and how this will be done? Will the randomization continue for a certain period, or will some patients receive the vaccine immediately and everyone then will receive it on an open label basis? There will be more trials ready to start this year, but volunteers will be facing dilemmas. Should I get the vaccine now, or should I volunteer in a new trial? And what rationale can we use to convince those who will need to volunteer to defer the moment they can get a vaccine? And there is a related question. How many different vaccines do we need? Which part of the investments should now be redirected to producing and deploying authorized vaccines more than developing new ones to eradicate the virus, and of course using Article 58 to help other healthcare settings get vaccines that they can use? And will these late trials be measuring efficacy in terms of symptomatic infections again, or will they be using immunogenicity as evaluation criteria after 3 weeks? In other terms, will we have a surrogate endpoint? And a question to John Ryan from the Commission: in which member states will citizens have to pay for the vaccine, and how much? Thank you.
Thank you. For the first questions, I give the floor to Marco and Fergus, and then afterwards to John. So Marco, Fergus, please.
Yes, indeed, a number of very good questions. So in principle, we would expect that the trials will continue for as long as possible, up to 24 months, according to the allocation in the 2 arms of the study, so placebo on one side and the vaccine on the other. But of course, we are cognizant of the fact that at least for those participants in the clinical trials that belong to risk group and so would have the right to receive the vaccine, according to the vaccination campaign, it would not be possible to retain them in the clinical trials. And therefore, the companies are already working in order to make sure that for any participants who may want to know what they've been receiving and they may be eligible for getting the vaccine, then they could do so. And of course, we have to live with that. Of course, we really hope that the data and the studies can continue as much as possible so that to generate informative data in the longer term with respect to long-term protection, occurrence of enhancement disease, and any other aspect related to safety. When it comes to new vaccines, well, it's pretty clear that we need more vaccines for the time being. Then how many is always difficult to say, but nevertheless, we are discussing with any developer what could be the way forward in terms of designing clinical trials that could then support an approval. And in this sense, we have already started a discussion around the possibility in case and when placebo-controlled trial will not be an option anymore, then what we can do. And indeed, two options that are under consideration is conducting non-inferiority study, looking into the level of protection from symptomatic infection. Even if we know that with vaccines that have very high efficacy, this would mean really large trial and would be really at the edge of what could be feasible in terms of clinical trials. And on the other side, very importantly, to try to understand if we can define correlates of protection or at least immune marker that could be used to immunobridge efficacy from one vaccine to the other, at least within the same kind of platform technology. So as an example, to bridge immunogenicity and infer protection from there between two different messenger RNA vaccines. And this, unfortunately, we don't have yet a good understanding of correlates of protection from the clinical data, but we are working with the manufacturers in order to get them as soon as possible so that we can come up with an idea of what can be done in terms of study design for next generation vaccines. Thank you.
Thank you. Fergus, do you want to complement?
I think just to reinforce what Marco said about the importance of, even if the existing trials are unblinded and people on placebo maybe have the opportunity to be vaccinated, but continuing to collect data on those who've been in the trials, and particularly those who've received vaccine, is extremely important, so that we gather as much benefit from their willingness to volunteer in these studies as we can, and that's important. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Then I give the floor to you.
Yeah, so considering the discussions which we've had with the member states so far, these are still evolving in respect of the questionnaire or the survey which I mentioned to you. There was, in fact, a discussion yesterday in the Health Security Committee on this topic of where the member states are in terms of rolling out the vaccine and any specific issues they've had logistically in reaching the target populations. I would prefer not to go into detail now on which countries are proposing to charge for delivery of the vaccines to citizens, because for the simple reason that this is a moving target. But I'd be very happy to provide an overview on this by email after the meeting. So that's one aspect. The other aspect I would mention is from the information which we have available from the member states, no member state is envisaging to charge vulnerable populations or target groups for the vaccine. In other words, it would only be in the second stage that the charge might be considered, and not for the first line target group populations. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Juan?
Thank you, Noel. We'll take a question from the broadcast now from Dr. Chuck Heaney, who is asking, what is the risk of vaccine-induced enhanced disease for those patients who have been previously, previously already COVID-19 and now they are using an mRNA vaccine?
Perhaps Harold, back to you.
That is an important and good question, and an interesting one. Important for patients, scientifically interesting. Currently, we have no evidence that something like that would happen. I'm afraid that is all we can say at the moment. That has been in the back of our minds. And we consider that both regarding the clinical trial data and what we know from experimental data. Currently, repeat, no evidence for that. Therefore, I suggest that we keep aware of this possibility, but unless we find evidence that this really happens, I would not change any current practice on this. Over.
Thank you, Harold. John, sorry, Juan, I meant.
Yes, thank you. So we will take now a question from the audience, and we give the floor to Elena Petelos, but we welcome all participants if they want to switch on their camera so that we can see. Of course, it's not mandatory, but just to let them know that you have this option. So please, Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juan. First of all, congratulations both to the Commission and to the EMA for holding multiple events very transparently and for answering all questions. I will try to avoid repeating questions previously asked, but as non-inferiority for future vaccines was mentioned, a concern that we have is the current dosing discussions are quite intense and prevalent also not only among public health specialists or other healthcare professionals, but also the public. And we have seen clinical trial data running up to vaccination after 42 days. And we're also seeing the UK implementing a different regime for managing scarce resource allocation. And we're also seeing the FDA advise against doing this also. So in essence, there will be data since there's diverging approaches across member states. So there will be comparative data to be generated. Is there a provision or a discussion to generate, since we cannot have the idea, which would have been an RCT large enough to inform before the summer decision-making in terms of dosing? So is there provision for combining registry data and generating comparative evidence across the EU? And also, have companies been advised on the need to generate such comparative efficacy data? Also, we're discussing effectiveness as well. And in terms of considering the superb Commission effort on procurement, one would think there are sufficient grounds from a public health perspective too, without restriction for the TFEU, that warrant joint assessment and of course joint evidence generation. So it will be very interesting for us to know whether this is being discussed along with potential prioritization. Last but not least, perhaps a question for John. The current strategy is more a per capita strategy, but there have been recommendations from ETAGE and many other bodies on identifying specifically vulnerable groups, not only in terms of multimorbidity or aging, but also in terms of other inequalities. So is there such a discussion for prioritizing vaccines across the EU so as to ensure better cross-border, if possible to say this, control of the disease? Thank you.
Thank you. These were a lot of questions. Also refer to the answer that was already given by Harold before. So I give first the floor to Marco. Then perhaps Peter, you can elaborate a little bit on the procurement and what the EMA is doing, and then I finally give the floor to John for the last question. So again to you, Marco.
Thanks. Yeah, important questions. Of course, we are in this debate about using vaccines according to different schedules. I think here what would be important is indeed to collect effectiveness data from this use in the various countries, so that to have an understanding of whether different strategies may derive different level of protection, and some could be better than others. I think that's probably is going to be also the best tool to try to understand the differences in effectiveness across a different population, and will provide very useful information for public health authorities for making their decision. Of course, for us at EMA, it would not be possible to commit the companies to do comparative studies, as this goes behind the role that we have as regulators. But of course, we are really keen in getting this effectiveness data, particularly with respect to the use of the vaccine in different conditions. And of course, very much interested to see what may come up from effectiveness studies using different posologies than the one that are currently approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
So thank you. Yes, and it's been important. It's important to state that we've been working very closely with the member states, with the European Commission, and also with ECDC to make sure that on-market surveillance and studies are done, both on effectiveness, as Marco has just touched on, and also on safety. If I just focus on the safety side and the safety of different vaccines that will be coming onto the market, and being used perhaps in different ways, in addition to the measures that Sabine Strauss has emphasized in her presentation. And we are starting now European level independent studies, which EMA is funding, which will collect data from across member states in a prospective manner, which will then be able to monitor the safety, if you like, in everyday medical practice, or real world data, if you like. We hope to extend these studies right across the European Union during the course of 2021, so that as new vaccines are introduced, we're collecting data from the majority of member states, and that will potentially show up differences in safety profiles between different vaccines. So just to emphasize, a very close collaboration between member states, EMA, ECDC, and of course the Commission, and both effectiveness studies and safety studies independent from industry are being put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Before giving the floor to John, Nikolai, is there anything that you would like to add from the member state point of view? Not sure if Nikolai is still online. And I give the floor to...
I'm here. I just said it was covered very nicely, I think. Nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I give the floor to John.
Yes, thank you very much. So thanks for this question. And in the vaccination communication, which we published on the Commission side on the 15th of October, which was subsequently discussed by health ministers and also in the Health Security Committee, we really tried to identify which would be the eventual priority groups which should be considered by member states when developing their national rollout strategies. And we thought, for example, that healthcare and long-term care facility workers would be one of these groups which should be immediately protected by means of the virus, but also people over 60 years of age, those with underlying health conditions. We heard some examples earlier on during the webinar today of cases where people with specific health conditions had already been vaccinated, sometimes even with 2 doses. And essential workers are, of course, a population which are really important for business continuity of society. It's really important that we protect these people who are forced to work in exposed circumstances, people who operate our transport systems, our commerce sector, and so on. Protecting those who cannot socially distance. I mean, there are people whose jobs or vocations or occupations require them to be in close contact with people, and these people also need to be considered. And last but not least, absolutely not least, are the disadvantaged socioeconomic groups. Now, during the earlier phase of the pandemic last year, we had a multitude of meetings with many groups, which I've mentioned in that list. We had meetings as late as yesterday with the Coalition for Vaccination, which brings together the representatives of the medical profession in Europe, the nurses in Europe, and the pharmacists in Europe, in order to see how we can get an information flow through these representative associations to their national members, specifically on the issue of vaccination, reinforcing the resources which are available to some of these organizations. But also we have had a very useful dialogue with the homeless organizations. We organized, for example, a European level discussion with the homeless and representative organizations. And now we have to repeat the same exercise with the homeless and with other disease-specific groups, I would say, in relation to vaccination, because it's through organizations such as this that we really see what the true picture is. We have one picture when we issue a survey to the member states. We have one picture which emerges when we're looking at data flows. We very often have a different picture when we speak to the people who are working on the ground and who are representing people with specific conditions or people who are in vulnerable populations. So we will be repeating this exercise now very quickly as the vaccines are rolled out to make sure that all sectors of the population have access to and are properly covered by the national vaccination strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Juan?
Thank you, Noel. So we'll take now one question from the internal chat, and it's from Martine Van Heck. She's talking about the possibility of the vaccine of blocking the transmission, and an element which is essential for vaccination strategy. At the moment, there is a knowledge gap, as explained before in the presentations, and she's asking, when does EMA expect that there will be information available about this?
Marco?
Yes, of course, a very important question. And we are working with the developers to collect what kind of information can be gathered from the pivotal clinical trials that supported approval. This was not a primary endpoint of the study, so it was a secondary one, but still they are trying to collect data using serology to understand what is the impact on infection. Which of course is not the same as what is the impact on transmission. So we have to be careful here, but of course already knowing something about what is the impact on infection can be very important to try to derive then what could be the implication for transmission. The problem is that of course relying just on serology may have significant limitations, and therefore it might not be possible to be conclusive. And this is another reason why that beside specific clinical trials that some investigators in the world are considering in order to specifically measure the impact on transmission, one source of evidence will definitely be the conduction of these large effectiveness studies that will look at the impact of vaccination at population level. And therefore, you may have some understanding of what is the ability of the vaccine really to turn down the transmission and to reduce the level of infection even in people that have not been vaccinated. So we'll definitely provide important information. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to say exactly by when we will be able to have this data, but at least from the clinical trials, it should be available in the next month or so.
Thank you. Juan?
Thank you, Noel. I'm going to take a question now coming from the outside, from the broadcast. It comes from the International Journal of Epidemiology and Health Services. And they're asking about the main trials of the two vaccines and whether patients who were allocated to the placebo group or the vaccine group have the same chance of being infected with the virus, and whether this has been taken into account in the study, and whether we could explain how this was done.
Harold or Marco?
Afraid there's not very much I can say to that. That was a classical randomization. I'm not aware that specifically there would have been stratified or we would have looked for exposure for possible infections. Both groups, the placebo group and the variant group, as I said, were randomized, and the criteria were that all of them were at an increased risk due to their job and so on and so forth. But I'm afraid I'm not aware of more than that. Maybe Marco can complement or take over.
Yeah, thanks, Harold. I think indeed, these studies were blinded and were randomized. So clearly, there was the same chance of being infected between those on placebo versus those that received the vaccine. And indeed, as Harold explained, many subjects in these studies were healthcare workers or frontline workers, so with more risk of being exposed to the virus. But of course, that was not the only population recruited in the trials, as indeed subjects with comorbidities and elderly about 65 years of age were included as well. And this will be the groups more at risk of severe COVID-19 in case infected. So the trials tried to maximize including a subject more at risk of exposure and also more at risk of severe COVID-19 if infected.
Thank you, Marco. Juan?
Thank you. We give the floor now to one participant who is Fernando Javier.
Okay, thank you. There are some concerns among colleagues, friends, and some people I've talked to from all over Europe about fertility, how being administered the vaccine may have as a side effect, an adverse effect on fertility. Can you please provide some information on that? And my second question is, how will the current vaccines that have been approved be affected by the new strains that are being currently discovered and investigated? Thank you in advance.
Thank you. For fertility, can I give the floor perhaps to Sabine? And then the next question back to Marco.
Thank you very much for the question. It's an important question. I'm not sure that I'm the best placed for the moment. From what I have read and that I know is that in the preclinical studies, there are no indications that there might be an impact on fertility. But for that, I also would like to hand over either to Marco or to Harold. I know that we will very carefully monitor pregnancy, the data available at the moment, and we need then the preclinical data mainly. We don't have any indications that there will be an impact on fertility. So over to you, Noel, to redistribute maybe the question, maybe other colleagues know more about it.
I will give to Marco then perhaps also for this question. Marco?
Yeah, no, indeed. And then to follow up to what Sabine just said, I have to say that the animal data were very reassuring with respect to any impact on fertility. And we don't have currently any evidence that there is any risk in that regard. And that is what is stated in the product information. Going to your second points about the variants, of course, this is a really important topic right now. As we said previously, at least for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, there were some studies conducted before the actual authorization that looked at the ability of the sera from vaccinated individuals to neutralize different variants, particularly variants in the receptor binding domain of the spike protein, which we know represent the area of immunodominance for the virus and the target of the vaccines. And it was reassuring to see that these sera were able to neutralize these variants. Of course, as you know, we don't have yet clear-cut data with respect to the new variants, particularly the UK one, but also maybe more importantly, the South African one, even if we may have heard today some publication came out showing that the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is able to neutralize variants that include a mutation in the position 501, which is the same one that occurs in the UK variant in the receptor binding domain. So this seems to be good news. Of course, it will be important to collect the actual data with the variant, both the UK one, as I said, importantly, the South Africa one. As we know, the South Africa one has a key mutation in the receptor binding domain that is a key immunodominant portion of the protein, of the receptor, and therefore it will be crucial to have an understanding that indeed that there is no great impact on the neutralization. Say this, of course, we will always have to take quite carefully the data that are emerging from these laboratory studies, as even if we may see some decrease in the level of neutralization, this would not mean necessarily that the vaccine lose completely efficacy or they will be poorly efficacious. So that's why it's so important also to follow on the ground with real world data what is happening and what is the effectiveness of the vaccine in places where variants are circulating. Thank you.
Thank you. Juan?
Thank you very much. We have now, I'm taking one question from the chat. Is from Michael Duffy, and he's asking why EMA is slower in approving the two vaccines as compared to FDA or UK?
Yes, I have already addressed that a couple of times in different fora, so I'll give this question to Fergus.
So Thank you. I mean, what's really important is that we have a thorough evaluation. As Harold has very well expressed, we are moving with great urgency. There are people working around the clock, but it's important that we carefully evaluate the data and move forward when we consider that to be robust and to support marketing authorization. The EU has chosen to use the conditional marketing authorization because that enables us to have all the assessment prior to the authorization, but also all the controls after marketing authorization for pharmacovigilance, as Sabine has much discussed, but also the manufacturing controls that apply to the existing. And I can see in the chat questions about new manufacturing sites coming on board. So that is continuously controlled, and it's done at the level of the European Union with a single solid scientific assessment for the whole of the EU, valid across member states, a single patient information and instruction for healthcare professionals, and the ongoing controls as the manufacturing aspects, new efficacy data, and new safety data are evaluated using the expertise from across the European Union. So I think this is really important for ensuring the confidence of citizens across the EU in using these vaccines. It does mean that it's taken slightly longer, but I think the benefits that accrue both prior to and after authorization and the fact that we're using the entire European expertise to do that with single outcomes for the whole of the EU is extremely important and a really important part of the public health approach in this context. Thank you.
Thank you. Kuan?
Yes, thank you very much. We can give now the floor to one participant. We give to Kostas Mistrelides.
Hi, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address a question. I would like to start with thanking you for the presentation. I think, as others have said, this really initiative is really helping increase the confidence of the public in the goings-on and the authorization of the COVID vaccines. My questions would revolve a little bit more around the post-marketing surveillance, and that's something that Sabine has touched on earlier as well. I wanted to know what are the plans around ensuring the most efficient handling of the big data that might be generated invariably from the post-marketing surveillance. And can you comment a little bit more on the collaborations that you've set up in order to monitor population effects for these vaccines? What modalities are we using to collect the data? And how are you planning to enable a data pipeline that ensures a standardized signal detection across the board and signal aggregate reporting, leading to eventually having a robust analysis in the population and being able to draft recommendations that really give some really good insight? I think these are important considerations because we are operating in a environment of collaborative competition with a lot of manufacturers who have a common goal and target, but also sometimes might be thinking about the competition of selling their actual products. But also we are, as Nikolai mentioned, at the level of the national competent authorities, have we ensured and are we striving to agree on protocols, for example, on real world evidence collection that ensure standardization across the board? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I know, Nikolai, that you have to leave at 3 o'clock. Is there something that you would like to answer in relation to real-world evidence? And then I give the floor further to Peter. Nikolai first, if you would like to, you still have time to react.
Absolutely. I think it's very important that we continue to follow these vaccines very carefully. It has been approved by conditional marketing authorizations, and both at the EMA level and nationally, we should follow this. We can do that both by monitoring our standard patient registries, national patient registries, following spontaneous reports by the vaccinators on adverse events, and at the same time to do control clinical studies with serial blood sampling on immunization levels and also any adverse events, as we are proposing in our enforced study locally. So I think it's all complementary, really. And it's certainly a task that will be ongoing, and I look forward to hearing what Peter can say on this as well.
Peter?
Yes, thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Kostas, for the question. We have great opportunities, actually, to do really good monitoring of products using modern techniques, using healthcare data. And Fergus was talking about the benefits of Europe and pooling expertise, but we can pool expertise, but we can also bring together data from different member states and even beyond Europe, bringing data from around the world together to increase our power to be able to monitor safety and effectiveness, as well as actually the natural history of the disease. And I have to say that we are working in all of these areas. So on drug utilization, vaccine use, on natural history of COVID-19, pregnancy, the effects of COVID-19 in pregnancy and effects on the unborn child. And work is going on at national level, at European level, and at international level. Just a few examples. Pregnancy. There is a study sponsored by the European Medicines Agency, coordinated by the University of Utrecht, involving data collection from many, many member states, but also sharing data from the US and Canada, looking at the effects of COVID-19 in pregnancy, and also looking at the effects of medicines on pregnancy, medicines used in COVID-19 and the effect on the unborn child. And of course, if we understand better how COVID-19 affects pregnancy, we can also inform those that take decisions on prioritization. And so who should get the vaccine? Should pregnant women or women of childbearing potential be prioritized, for example? You talked about protocols. Again, I'm pleased to say that we've been working very much to produce high quality protocols that can be used by different actors. And back in the second quarter of 2020, the European Medicines Agency initiated a project, again coordinated by the University of Utrecht, called Access. And some of the outputs of Access include standard publicly available protocols for both effectiveness studies and safety studies that then vaccine manufacturers can use, academics can use, other regulators around the world can use. And those protocols have been through high levels of peer review and scrutiny, including peer review for the safety ones from some of the experts from the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, the PRAC. And those, therefore, are resources for public good that can be shared and used by many. So there's a lot of activity in this area. And I would really emphasize that by working together at European level and also with our international partners, and by bringing together big data sets from across different countries, it increases our ability to monitor safety and effectiveness effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We are almost at the end of the Q&A, so I give the floor back to Juan.
Yes, maybe we can take one additional question. And I'm taking a question from the chat, from the internet chat, and they are stressing is Professor Oliver Farr, and he's stressing the importance of reporting by patients and healthcare professionals, and how we can ensure and how we can raise awareness to ensure that this is done and to increase the number of reports that are provided.
Okay, I already alluded to the interaction with healthcare professionals. I give the floor to Melanie to perhaps further elaborate on it. Over to you, Melanie.
Yeah, thanks, Noel, and good afternoon, everybody. So indeed, healthcare professionals and people receiving the vaccine should be provided with all the necessary information upon vaccination. So this includes the prescribing information, which has the summary of product characteristics, which is for healthcare professionals and describes the terms of the authorization and how it should be used. The package leaflet, any conditions for the authorization, as well as the label. and also the medicines overview, which is a simple question and answer format which explains why the vaccine has been authorized and how it should be used. And as mentioned by Sabine, it's very important for patients and healthcare professionals to familiarize themselves with this information and to report very promptly any suspected side effects to the competent authorities. And we're working very closely with patient consumer organizations and healthcare professional organizations to raise awareness of this, to work also closely with them to disseminate the information, as well as to the member states, to make sure that reaches the healthcare professionals and those receiving the vaccination across the EU at national level.
Thank you, Melanie. So we have now come to the end of this Q&A session. I would like to thank everyone, all the presenters and all the panelists for their very valuable contributions. I would like to thank also the colleagues from the Communication and Stakeholder Division for organizing this meeting, which went extremely smoothly, and for all the hard work that they have put into it, including the presentations for the presenters. We also would like to thank all of you for having taken the time in order to listen to us, and we hope that the meeting today has provided you with a better understanding of the assessment, the approval, and the ongoing activities for rollout of the two newly approved EU COVID-19 vaccines, the Comirnaty and Moderna vaccines. Perhaps a couple of messages that you would like to leave with you. We continue to work and mobilize resources and expertise across the EU network to carry out the scientific evaluations fast and rigorously, so that we can deliver vaccines that protect EU citizens as soon as possible. But we also hope that you're reassured that the approval of vaccines in the EU is based on science and on studies demonstrating safety and efficacy, and also the pharmaceutical quality, and this for all EU vaccines. We are facing the worst health crisis in a century. However, the vaccines offer hope to start getting out of this crisis. As it happened in the past with smallpox, we know vaccines can eradicate diseases. It's still too soon to know when and to which extent exactly these vaccines will contribute to eradicate COVID-19, but we are convinced that will be an important tool, that they will be an important tool to beat the pandemic. We have presented key data from the main studies showing how these two mRNA vaccines show a high efficacy protecting against COVID-19 disease. This can be in itself considered an important and immediate benefit for people preventing COVID-19 disease with symptoms. In addition, less people getting sick implies less pressure on healthcare and on the healthcare systems. And once we get enough people vaccinated, we expect to see the full impact of these vaccines in the wider population. Looking at the safety profile of these vaccines, it's very similar to what we see with other vaccines, generally mild or moderate side effects of a temporary nature. When vaccinating millions of people very quickly, we of course anticipate that any very rare side effects will emerge, like with every medicine. But we already emphasized to you that we have a very robust pharmacovigilance system that is ready to act if needed to protect citizens. You have heard how regulators are preparing to monitor large volumes of data generated in a short time by mobilizing extra resources, and would like to emphasize the critical role patients, healthcare professionals, and citizens at large will have in reporting side effects. COVID-19 vaccine safety will be stronger with your participation, and therefore please report any adverse reactions through the tools and through the means that we have highlighted before. We recognize how important it is that the evidence behind our approval of the new vaccines are made as clear and transparent as possible in the EU population. Today, we try to summarize the key information and direct you to the sources where the full scientific information is available on the EMA website for the public, for the scientists, and for the medical professions. The scientific work of EMA approving vaccines is only the first step. Key work is also done at EU level by the European Commission, incentivizing vaccine development and coordinating purchases and supplies for all countries in the European Union, and this in an unprecedented way. Finally, the work of national authorities in the member states, it is extremely critical to ensure that large-scale vaccination campaigns are set up and run smoothly, taking care of logistics at national and local level, and ensuring that healthcare workers and citizens have adequate guidance and information. But the resources from the member states are also very critical to help the EMA in evaluating the applications and following up on these. On a more practical way now to conclude, we are stepping up our efforts producing a lot of material on COVID-19 vaccines, and we very much appreciate feedback from the public and external stakeholders to understand if there are gaps or areas where they consider we can improve. Without your feedback, we will not be able to improve. So please don't hesitate in order to let us know what you think, what we can do better. We are there in order to always continuously make things better. It is extremely important for us to hear your views as they inform and help us to refine our activities and in our task to protect the health of EU citizens. We have not been able to take all of the comments and questions at this time, certainly not the large amount of questions which came through the chat box. However, all of your input will be shared with the relevant people in the different institutions so that they can be considered during our ongoing work. A recording of this meeting will be published on our website in a few days for the benefit of those who were not able to watch today. In addition, we hope to be able to hold more public meetings in the future to ensure we keep the public updated of our work and our role in this pandemic. And with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you once again for all the contributions, for all the support, and for your interest. I wish you a nice continuation of the day, and until the next time. Thank you.